What's going on, good people? I really appreciate you listening in to the first episode of Who Knows, It's Just Life, the podcast. I just wanted to give a quick mention that this podcast was recorded just one day before I heard about the assassination of Walter Wallace Jr. And so I don't mention him in the episode, but trust we will be getting into his case and other cases of police brutality in future episodes. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the first show. Greetings, good people. Welcome to Who Knows, It's Just Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Kyle. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Obviously, this is the first episode, so I'll do a little introduction of myself and the show and get into some topics today as well. So first of all, I'm a straight, cisgender black man, born, raised, and still based in the Maryland portion of the DMV. Some of y'all might know me from the Raceisms Podcast, which I had the pleasure of producing. Their first season just ended, and I'm taking kind of the time in between here to kind of get this started, and we'll be coming in with season 2 later. But if you're not familiar, Raceisms, spelled RACEISMS, is a podcast hosted by Jaslyn and Lisa, and they explore a number of crucial conversations around race through their own lenses, and it's a really good show. Their final episode, called Meet the Producer, interviewed me, and we addressed all of the episodes that they had to that point throughout the first season, and I kind of touched on my thoughts on those topics, which shed a lot of light on my life and where I'm from and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to learn more about me from that perspective, I encourage you to check out that particular episode. But really, I recommend the entire podcast. Jaslyn and Lisa do a great job hosting that. So definitely want to big up them. And honestly, they're the ones who inspired me to do this. I got to be real. Seeing them do what they do just got me motivated to actually just buckle down and do this here myself. So appreciate them. Shout out to Jaslyn and Lisa and the Racisms Podcast for, inspiring me to do this and to kind of get me started on this whole thing. So yeah. A couple other things I'll mention. I'm a blurred, I love that we have a name now. Back in high school, I was just a nerd and people questioned whether or not I was even black. But now we got a name. I'm a blurred. I'm a dad, an engineer, musician, athlete, and a litany of other things. Y'all will continue to hear more about me through this time that we're sharing together. And I think it's important to also note that I'm striving to be an active anti-racist, feminist, womanist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic person. And those are all constantly struggles that we all have to, work towards doing and realizing in our day-to-day lives. I'm familiar with a few of those, from for a long time. I've been actively doing those, and honestly, the anti-transphobia is newer to me, and so I'm learning a lot about that. But in general, these are all topics that we all need to learn about, including myself. You can never stop learning enough about these and how to be a holistic person and a person who is really not out here perpetuating systems and attitudes and cultures that are detrimental and deadly to people that either are us or aren't like us. And shoot, I'm a father too, so I got to figure this out for myself. But I'm also bringing up a son in the world, and I gotta make sure that he's a decent person, and B, make sure he's on the right path in these topics as well, and make sure he carries the torch. And he'll probably do a better job than me because the world is different, and he'll be conditioned a little bit differently than I was. But anyway, so this podcast will touch on a number of topics. We're gonna talk about all those 4 topics we just talked about. We'll get into politics. We'll get into maybe a little bit of sports, which is a little bit of the topic today. We'll get into relationships, raising kids, whatever it is, health and wellness, fitness, whatever it is that's going on. It's fair game. I'll probably be having a couple of guests on here at some point. Hopefully I'll get my family members on here. That would be super fun. So, but regardless who's on the podcast, and I'm speaking for myself primarily, the premise of the show is who knows? It's just life. There's things that I do that I'm familiar with. There's things that, I've experienced, but at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't have this all figured out. And really, I don't think anybody else does either. So the show is really just to explore that learning process. And as Neely Fuller says, I'm still learning. And I feel like that is a true statement really for everybody's life. And I at least I'll claim it. It's always true for me. And that's just something that is going to ride through this show. And so no matter what topic it is that we talk about here, it's just part of the learning process. And so as listeners, I encourage you to give me feedback and check me if I say something that's off color or whatever, because you help me learn in that moment. Hey, maybe there's some things that I've said that you didn't know, and maybe the learning goes both ways. But really, this is really just a public expression of my learning, and I welcome you to join me on that. And I hope it's going to be fun. I'm going to have fun. It might just be me in here having fun by myself, but I hope y'all have fun with me. So that's kind of the goal of this podcast. Another thing I'll mention is that, so I'm in my 30s, and I'm young enough to be considered a millennial, but old enough to not really get with a lot of the millennial stuff, or not really understand a lot of it. Social media is one of those things that I basically never did. I had Facebook back when you had to be in college to have it. And then after that, I kind of fell off Facebook. It's not on my phone. Like, I just never look at it ever. And really, I just never got Instagram. I had Twitter for a little bit when I was trying to promote my music stuff. But really, I never did social media, like, at all. And so obviously I'll need a little bit of social media to kind of promote this and whatnot, and kind of just get a digital footprint out there. And so I basically thought that this would be a fun way to kind of go through entering social media at my age with my experience and my lack of digital footprint. I think there might be some funny experiences that I have learning the hard way, what most of y'all listening probably already know, because most everybody's on social media. So anyway, that might be a fun thing to add into this here as well. So I'll touch on that a little bit later. At the very end, we're going to talk about some ways where you can get at me and get in touch with me, and we'll go from there. So I'm gonna start it off today with just some updates. So this is a period of the show where I'll just update you all on what's going on, and that could either be a worldly thing, a national thing, local, personal, whatever it is. There's a whole lot of things going on right now. We got End SARS happening in the U.S. I know we're gearing up for the general election. Many people have already voted, but the general election is happening in the next week. We've got all the Black Lives Matter stuff going on still. We've got a whole bunch of other activist things. We got France and having his issues with the Muslim community, which I've just saw some headlines in, and I haven't even delved deep enough into that, but that looks very deep and very contentious as well. So there's a whole lot of things going on in the world right now. I'm going to probably talk about the election and all that stuff later. But for me, a topic that just kind of resolved itself for me was the baseball season. This is not going to be a sports show, but I am a huge baseball fan, and it ties into how I feel about this baseball season, ties into some of the other topics like racism and all that kind of stuff as well, just because of what all took place this year. And so the World Series just ended. The Dodgers won for their first time in like 32 years. I think the last time they won was in '88. So they can all, be happy about that. I'm blown though, because if you watch Game 6, Blake Snell for the Rays was pitching a gem. He was lights out. He was striking everybody out. He struck out like the first 3 batters of the Dodgers lineup, both of the times he faced each of them. So 6 strikeouts from the first 3 guys. They took him out in the 6th inning, I think it was, and it wasn't a pitch count issue. They took him out, and of course, the reliever comes in and gives up runs, and that's the ball game. So that was frustrating for me. I'm a kind of an old school guy in terms of like, hey, if the starter's in there and he's dealing, like, let him deal, let that happen. But it was an exciting World Series. I was happy to see the Rays win a couple games. Game 4 was a classic. For those who don't watch baseball, it's unfortunate because baseball is amazing. It's an amazing sport because in Game 4, you had a guy that nobody ever heard of, like Brett Phillips was his name. And he's not a very good player. Like he's a player that's in the league, but he didn't even make the Rays team for the championship series. So he's definitely not one of those star players who's always going to be in there. Because that game was as strategic as it was, he was brought in as a pinch runner the inning before, and he shows up batting with 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th inning, and his hit leads to the Rays winning Game 4. And I just love stories like that, because in basketball, in football, whatever, like in basketball, your 12th person on the bench is not getting the final shot at the in any game, much less a game in the playoffs. But here's a guy who's like barely made the team, and he's up because the lineup is such that's when he was up. He was up in that moment, and he was made a hero that night. And I just love the fact that like baseball puts people in circumstances like that where like managers, coaches, nobody would want that person in that situation necessarily. But they have a chance to shine and it happens. So baseball is a very fun sport for me in that way. And I love numbers. I love data and all that stuff anyway. So I just love baseball. But the reason why baseball's conclusion is still a relevant topic for me and I think relevant for the show is the relationship baseball has with Black America in general and the way it handled the whole George Floyd thing and the whole Black Lives Matter situation this summer. And I'm a huge proponent of Black people watching baseball, Black people being in baseball, because baseball was a huge thing for us as a community. The Negro Leagues were a big thing. Rube Foster was a genius in terms of his ideas of using baseball to integrate society. The way baseball integrated was not what Rube Foster wanted. He did not want individual players Black players going into the major leagues. He wanted the Negro Leagues to be as competitive as the Major League Baseball franchise, and he wanted Black-owned teams and Black teams to enter MLB with Black ownership, Black management, Black players. So I love his vision, and I really think that we, as a collective, there's a lot to learn from what he was trying to do. And unfortunately, in his case, I mean, he kind of started to succumb to some mental health issues. And he died in 1930, which was a bit before baseball was integrated. But the way it ended up being integrated, he would just not have been cool with at all compared to like what his goals really were. As it stands, though, baseball has this positioning as historically as like the thing that integrated America, because it was integrated in 1947, which was a year before the military was integrated in 1948, which of course was before Brown v. Board of Education. So it was one of the first landmark integrations in this country. Baseball was. And again, it didn't happen the way Rube Foster wanted it. Like obviously zero Black ownership transpired, zero Black management transpired. It was literally just Black players being integrated into Major League Baseball, which killed the Black business, which was the Negro Leagues, unfortunately. And a lot of times in integration, we see how integration was a plague to Black businesses, which is tragic. I know Killer Mike did an episode on his show about that. And there's just there was a lot of things that went wrong when integration took place. I know it's not popular to say that, but it's very true. Anyway, baseball was put on this pedestal historically as like this great forward-thinking organization to integrate and blah, blah, blah. I call BS on all that because that was basically a strategic move. I mean, the white establishment knew that Black people loved baseball and would pay to see baseball at their stadiums if they just allowed them in. And Black people would watch Major League Baseball anyway, even if black folks weren't in it, because it was the Premier League. Like, let's just be honest, it was the Premier League. However, you can't really call it a Premier League because a lot of talent was in the Negro Leagues that was better than the big leaguers at the time. So, and that's true if you read any account of any player who played barnstorming off season. Like they played with the Black players, on the off season. They'll tell you how good Satchel Paige was. They'll tell you how good Josh Gibson was. Like anyway, baseball has this kind of phony legacy of being this like pillar organization that like is so forward looking or whatever. It's not. As I alluded to earlier, it integrated for financial reasons. It just wanted to make money off of the Black fan base and the talent, which was Black baseball players. So, it integrating wasn't because they were purely, they no longer were white supremacists and racist or whatever. They just wanted to make the money that they were missing out on. Like, that's what it was. And then if you jump to today, the fact that when George Floyd was killed, everybody and their mom was rushing to try to say Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. NASCAR and the National Hockey League beat Major League Baseball with a Black Lives Matter statement. And these are two sports arenas with pretty much zero Black people in them and not a whole lot of black fans. They beat Major League Baseball to the Black Lives Matter thing, which again, I have thoughts about the whole everybody, all those companies saying Black Lives Matter, whatever, including my former employer, everybody said it. And I know in terms of my former employer, they don't mean it. Like, they really don't. And I know that from a fact from that perspective. But anyway, all they had to do was come up with a statement. Like, you don't have to actually believe it. Just everybody's putting out a statement. That's all everybody was doing at that point anyway. Major League Baseball was last of the major sports to do anything. And then, come opening day, and granted, their season was delayed a lot because of COVID. The season didn't really start until the very end of July. And so that, there had been a whole couple of months between George Floyd's killing and the start of the Major League Baseball season, at which point they decided to have Black Lives Matter on the field, and everybody, like all the players, did like kneeling or some kind of, show of support for Black Lives Matter. A bunch of fans hated that. I don't care. Some of the players didn't even like it. I don't care. Whatever. Like that all that took place. And I think that's it. All that took place, and it's not enough, right? It's just not enough. And to kind of highlight, the gap here, I'm going to talk about this video that they did. So Major League Baseball had a video that they put out, and the video was with Harold Reynolds, who, for those who don't know, Harold Reynolds is a black man who played baseball professionally in the 80s, I think a little bit in the 90s, but he's had a long career as a commentator on MLB Network. And so he's one of the black guys. He's a black guy that's on there. And I like him for his analysis and stuff like that. He's not a perfect person. He's had some issues with women and allegations of sexual harassment and stuff like that. So not a perfect figure by any stretch. In this moment, though, I thought it was interesting because MLB put him in the position to host a MLB Black Players Roundtable. And this took place in mid-June. And Harold Reynolds, of course, black man, he's hosting it. He's kind of representing the league, which had to be awkward for him. Because, again, the league is really not forward-thinking with this. It had Sharon Robinson, who's the daughter of Jackie Robinson. She did her best to politely but eloquently call out the MLB for its kind of crappy job with handling race relations in general. Then they had Josh Bell, Sterling Sharp, and John Duplantier, who are players, on the roundtable. Now, of those three players, Josh Bell is the only one that people might know about. He's a stud. He's a first baseman for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Had a hell of a year a couple years ago. He's the only one that people recognize. The other two, I think, are still technically rookies. They're coming up in the league. They're young pitchers, whatever. They're talented, but they haven't really made their footprint in the league yet. So in this discussion, you see Harold Reynolds try to represent his employer, which is the MLB, but also have this conversation about race with MLB players and Sharon Robinson. And he has to toe this line because MLB is his employer, but there's a truth about the black experience in America, the reactions to how everything took place this summer with Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others. Harold Reynolds is trying to, make sure his employer looks good because they're doing this while being honest and maintaining some integrity as a black man in terms of like how this is actually going to take place. And Sharon Robinson, she is in a position to call out MLB because her father's Jackie Robinson. She's been a very active proponent of him and his mission and all that. And she's been long critical of MLB's Jackie Robinson Day, which is when all players wear number 42, which is Jackie Robinson's number. That number, by the way, is retired. Nobody else can wear that number in baseball. And everybody wears the number 42, no names on the backs of the jerseys or anything. And so everybody's out there paying homage and respect to Jackie Robinson for having broken the color barrier. And that's on April 15th every season. And she kind of said that they always call me on Jackie Robinson Day, but there's not much else other than that. There's nothing else. They don't really do anything. And they started this RBI program, which is supposed to help, get young black kids, into baseball, which we're starting to see some of the talent from that program come into the league, which is exciting to see, but it really isn't much at all. And there's not much that the league has done to get baseball back into black households and stuff like that. So anyway, that I appreciate her being on there and being as honest as she was on there. But what's most telling to me was John Duplantier, who's he's a 26-year-old player. He's a pitcher. He told a story that to me just highlighted how bad racism is in this country, for one, obviously, but also how baseball is, not the purveyor of integration and whatever that people think it is because of Jackie Robinson and all that. So he told a story. He's from the Houston area, and so he was playing in high school. He was playing first base, and he said he was the only black player on his team, within management, coaches, anything like that. I think he even said in the entire league. He was probably the only black player in the entire league. And, at this point in his high school career, he was fairly well known. People knew he was going to play college ball and everything. He was kind of, getting some attention in terms of him being a good player. So he's playing first base. The opposing dugout, who's on the first base side of the field, he hears one of the players kind of randomly at some point in the game, he said, I got a rope and a tree with your name on it. And he heard this statement and he turned around and started storming over to that bench, to that dugout. The only thing that stopped him from doing something, probably, who knows what he would have done, but the only person that stopped him was the umpire at first base, who also happened to be black. And this umpire held him and kept talking to him, said, don't do this. Like, don't waste it on this. Don't waste it on this. Like he knew who he was and everything. He was like, nah. He's like, bro, he calmed him down. And John went back to went to his own dugout and said, somebody else got to play first base. I need to cool off. And that's not even the worst part of the story. The worst part of the story is that nobody said anything to him after the incident. Not his coach, not his teammates, nothing. And some of these players, he said, he's known since he was like, I don't know, like in elementary school. He's played ball with some of these kids for a long time at this point. None of them said anything. And this is a young man who's 26. He was in high school in 2010, 2011. So this was not even 10 years ago that this happened. I just think that story just shows how bad racism is in this country and how ill-equipped white people are to how to handle situations like that. And so we're going to get into a lot more about that in general, like as a broader theme in terms of American history and all that kind of stuff, later. But I don't know. I just feel like that is just such a very glaring statement, or I just feel like that's a very glaring example of how where we are in this country. And anyway, so I appreciate this roundtable having happened. And by the way, it was all virtual. Everybody was zoomed in and whatever. So and they did a fairly good job considering the circumstances. But yeah, I don't know. So baseball. I remember when baseball was the last one to come out with their Black Lives Matter stuff and everything. I was really lukewarm. I was really blown about the season. I really didn't care that much, and their reaction to COVID was problematic too. They were very, very unorganized with that. So my infatuation with the league, I shouldn't say infatuation. I never really was infatuated with the league. My like for Major League Baseball was severely diminished with everything that took place this summer, and I did end up paying attention to the season. I played fantasy baseball, like a super nerdy league and everything, so I kind of wanted to be competitive there and pay attention to a degree, and it worked because I was a league champion. But anyway, I don't know. So this is one of those conflicts where I feel like if I'm really true, if I'm really true to what I'm about or whatever, like with all these racial ideas and anti-racism stuff like that, should I even support the league? Because I kind of took that stance with the NFL. Like the NFL reeks MAGA to me. Kaepernick was treated the way he was treated, and that whole, that whole scenario. I worked with people at that time who stopped watching the league because players wouldn't just stand up and play, and whatever. So, and I kind of nixed the NFL. Like I don't follow the NFL anymore. I love football as a sport. Like I played it. I will argue with anybody that baseball is as entertaining as football. Football has a ton of boring downtime and calls back and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, football's a good sport. Like I can't lie. Like I played it in high school. Like, yeah, football's fun. But I definitely don't watch the NFL anymore. And it was for political reasons. So why? Like I felt conflicted because I was like, I should do the same thing with the MLB. Or maybe not. I don't know. It's just an internal conversation I'm having with myself. I know plenty of people who still watch the NFL. They think similarly to me, but they still watch the NFL, and that's fine. That's their choice. Some people. One friend of mine is like, if black people chose not to participate in everything that was problematic, we would literally not participate in anything because everything is problematic. The currency's rooted in slavery. I mean, every holiday is probably like the 4th of July didn't include us. Thanksgiving was a brief reprise during a genocide. I mean, if you really, so I don't know. So at the end of the day, do you just enjoy the things you can enjoy? So like sports, it's a good release. The competition is fun. Do I let myself just enjoy that for what it is? I did for baseball this year, and I don't know, but I mean, get at me. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know what you think. Am I hypocritical for nixing the NFL and still paying attention to MLB? I don't know. And for those, that's the other thing. People who reacted to Kaepernick and the Black Lives Matter stuff across sports saying, oh, why is sports political? Why is sports political? They are completely blind or just ignorant to the fact that sports are hella political. And that came up recently. Troy Aikman and Joe Buck were caught talking about the flyovers over the football games. By the way, why are they doing flyovers when there's like zero fans in the stands? That makes no sense anyway. But all that is propaganda. That's propaganda for the military. And I was looking into it a little bit later. Like NPR came out with an article that talked about how the Pentagon paid like millions and millions of dollars to the teams for the flyovers. The Pentagon, our tax dollars, went to the owners of these franchises who are billionaires for them to have permission to do a flyover for their promotional recruitment, which is how it was categorized and budgetized so that our tax dollars seem like they went to a good cause to, help recruiting for the military. No, these funds went to pay for flyovers for sporting events. When we talk about politics in sports, we have to be very, very honest about where politics in sports are. Sports have a hell of a lot of politics in them. I mean, we talk about the breast cancer awareness stuff. Like they do good things too. I mean, but these are all political. Everything is political, especially with the military appreciation stuff. I mean, I'm based in the DMV. I like the Nationals. I like the Orioles too. The Nationals have a moment in every home game where everybody they highlight some folks who came home, some troops who came home recently or whatever, and everybody tips their cap and claps for them. It's a guaranteed standing ovation every game, and I do the same. I clap, I stand up, I do my thing because I will respect somebody for doing what they think is right for themselves and their country. I'm not gonna argue with the individual. My argument is with the institution that's sending them to places they probably shouldn't need to be. But anyway, all that is political. All that is political. The saying the national anthem before the game is even political. All that stuff is political. So for those people who are talking about, take politics out of the sports, you're lying. You're lying to yourself because you like clapping for the troops. You like doing these things, and that's political as well. You like doing the national anthem and all that stuff. That's all political. So I think we just need to be honest with that and let people be people, for real. I think one thing that's happened in journalism recently, over the last, like, I guess 20 years or more, is that people have been allowed to be more themselves. And that's another thing too. When Stuart Scott passed away several years ago, but what I didn't realize, for those who don't know, Stuart Scott was one of the marquee news anchors for SportsCenter way back in the day, back in the 90s, early 90s. And he held it down, like, and Stuart Scott, like, has swag, and nobody knew what that, like, nobody really, swag wasn't a popular term back then, but he would say, like, oh, so-and-so's up at the plate and he was cool as the other side of the pillow and he hits a home run or whatever. Like, he just had all these sayings for days that just made it so fun. And back then, SportsCenter was an hour-long program, and that repeated every hour for the whole morning. So, like, Saturday mornings, my brother and I, we would just watch SportsCenter over and over again because he was so entertaining. It was him and Rich Eisen, and and Rich Eisen would come out of his shell too. But before that, sports was like dry. Like, they would just sit down and say, well, in the bottom of the ninth inning, so-and-so did something, and it was da-da-da-da-da-da, and the count was 2-2. It was boring. It was dry. It was like, think of Tom Brokaw, like old school news, like old school, like suited up and whatever, like just level tone, and everybody was lying to you that they were unbiased. Now we know everybody's biased. Like, everybody's biased. Just be your bias, be you, and report your stuff the way you see it. Like, let's just be honest about that. So let the players do the same thing. Let the players do the same thing. Like, if a player wants to wear something about whatever, let them wear it. And I know that has to go both ways. If somebody wants to be all like, racist or whatever, let them do that. I'd rather know that they're racist than have them hide it and have them not, have them like hate me and I don't even know who they are. Now, you know what? Go ahead and tell me who you are. I want to know who you are. But I also want players to be able to be active and be vocal about whatever it is they care about. So, like, players wearing certain jerseys or whatever, putting things on to, like, represent somebody or something, go for it, do it, go at it, and I don't know, all that stuff I think is should be fine. And I don't think the leagues should hinder us from telling our stories and using our platforms in a way that helps ourselves and helps our people. That's just a personal opinion of mine. So I'm going to stop it there in terms of that. I hope that gives you a feel for the kind of things we'll talk about. And believe me, we'll get into a number of different topics, and this one will feel like, I can't even believe we talked about baseball for a hot minute. But since the season just ended and that was top of mind and I'm passionate about it, I just had to go there. It'll be a long off season, so I won't have any good excuse to bring it up in the future. So, so that's it for now on baseball. Yeah, so for my quick social media journey piece, so I just literally joined Instagram for the first time like 2 days ago, maybe it might have been yesterday. It might have been yesterday. And I joined, I found a picture to use. And at first I was like, they said, oh, can we have access to your camera? And I said, no. And they're like, this is Instagram. It's about pictures. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that doesn't make any sense. So I allowed it to do that, but I haven't posted anything yet. But over the course of like last night and today, like, Instagram told me like, oh, you're all caught up. And like, I was like, this is dry. Like this, like, I was like, this is like, is this broken or something? And I texted my friend and she was like, you got to follow like social media people. And I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense. And I kind of knew that. I mean, I did know that, but I was just expecting stuff to, I don't know, like I had followed like a handful of folks, mostly friends and a couple family members and a couple of folks that I knew were kind of social media type people. But the list of who I was following was probably like 10 people deep. So like, I was just like, man, this is dry. Like, what is going on? So I started to expand who I'm following, and some on my own volition, some was at the request of friends as well. But this will be an experience. I know there's some stuff I'm following where I'm just like, yo, people look at this stuff, and other stuff is really informative. Like I'm growing Corona helped me gain the courage to grow my beard out a little bit. So I was kind of looking at Instagram for like tips on how to like maintain beards and stuff like that. So I see the value in it. I really do. I see the value in it. And, I hopefully I will continue to learn and use it for good, not evil. And hopefully I learn to manage my time on it. I know it can be a time suck, so that's another concern. I hope I can manage that. But yeah. So as I close out the episode, I want to do something that I'm going to kind of swipe an idea from a podcast that I like called Code Switch off of NPR. They have songs giving them life, and I think that's a beautiful idea. And I like that they do that. I'm gonna kind of do a similar thing. I'm gonna call it. I'm just gonna say rock with me. Do you rock with me? So the song I'm rocking to right now is one that I gotta admit is a little bit of a shameless promotion, but this is with my buddy My Span, who did this song called Stand Up, and it's basically a protest the NFL anthem. And he had sent me, some concepts for a beat, months ago. And so I made the beat, and he came around and came with these bars about the NFL. He had one line in there where you're shouting out, not shouting out, but really hitting that Jay-Z, talking about no one man should have all that power. But basically he's talking about, the NFL and, just the blatant hypocrisy in the NFL between the owners, obviously rich white male owners, and black people sacrificing their own bodies to make it, competitive and entertaining. And I know a lot of players get paid, but let's not forget how few players actually get the real big bucks. And the tenure in the NFL is so short nowadays, and money is all tied up in performance and all that kind of stuff. So the big contract numbers you hear are not really guaranteed, and a lot of players don't get the money that you hear about in the news. But anyway, Maya's verses go in. He talks about he calls out the owners, like I said, but he even calls out the other black players for real. Like he was like, Cap took a knee, and some black players joined with him in terms of like what he was trying to do, but not enough did for real. Like if we're looking at what that could have been, I mean, that was a huge thing. And if you could even cut to today, to the 2020 season, and you could see how, not the NFL season, I'm saying the 2020 sports year, you could see how after the Jacob Blake shooting, I mean, you saw NBA players stop playing. You saw Major League Baseball players stop playing. A lot of games in Major League Baseball were canceled. And it looked like the NBA season, and they were in the middle of the playoffs, it looked like their season might be canceled. Like they were about to just cancel the playoffs for real. So, in that moment, you saw a lot more drastic moves taking place on behalf of Jacob Blake and, just police brutality, which is the same issue Kaepernick took a knee for, by the way. He was doing, that was his whole point. And there weren't any stoppages or anything like that even threatened in the NFL when that originally took place. So just comparing the two times, I mean, the NFL just, and Maya's verse basically calls out black players in the NFL saying that they didn't do that. In 2020, obviously the energy is just different this year. I mean, with everything that's been happening since the summer and dating back to Ahmaud Arbery and all the things that led up to George Floyd's killing. I mean, I'm not going to, it may be unfair to compare the two, but maybe it's not, because the point of Maya's verse is that if we were more organized and had a plan, when I say we, I mean the black leadership in general from a country standpoint, but even black players within the NFL, if we had more leadership and collective strategy at that level, Kaepernick wouldn't have been isolated out. He wouldn't have been ostracized by himself and a couple of other players that were with him ostracized for what they did. It would have been more of a collective thing, and they could have used their economic power to really push that needle forward. But anyway, the song is dope, if I do say so myself, and I appreciate Maya's bars on this joint, and I just appreciate his ideas for the beat and just making this thing even come to fruition. So, and it was an honor to even just be a part of that process and to be able to produce that for him. It seemed relevant for this discussion because that song is about protesting the NFL, which is again something that I did early, when everything was going on. And so that was something that I fully supported the song and everything. But now looking back, in terms of my own reaction to the Major League Baseball season and how they were just problematic with, the Black Lives Matter stuff. And really, they've just been problematic about race like the whole time. Like, and I know we already talked about that. But anyway, so that's the song I'm rocking to right now. Shout out to My Span on that joint. And I'll post a link to the song in the liner notes of the show. That is it for the show today. We're going to get into a lot more of these topics later in the coming weeks and months and years, hopefully, assuming we keep this rolling for this long. But I appreciate you rocking with me today. I hope to get your ear next time. And if you want to get at me, my Twitter and my Instagram is RealDadult, RealDadult. You can direct message me on there, which I've heard is normally referred to as DMs. All this is new to me. This is going to be fun, I promise. Anyway, thank you for rocking with me for this first episode. I hope to catch your ear next time. Be safe, be well. Peace.